Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Board of Selectmen's meeting for Monday, September 21st. Mr. Clerk, would you lead us in the Pledge of the Flag?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, so on the docket for tonight at 6:30, Organization Pledge of Allegiance, read mail. 6:35, the Littleton Electric Light Department has a request to install a pad-mounted switch on the Littleton Common. 6:45, Elder Human Service Needs Assessment Report Presentation. 7:15, input updates from public and members. 7:30, joint meeting with the Water Commissioners, Board of Health, Planning Board, Conservation Commission, Clean Lakes Committee, Finance Committee about stormwater management from the Department of Energy Protection, Stormwater Coordinator. At 8:30, Town Administrator, Assistant Town Administrator for Finance and Budget. First up, November 2nd, 2015, Special Town Meeting, Order of Articles and Recommendations. B, Staffing Vacancy Reviews, or second, sorry. And third, Procurement, Highway, Road Salts. And finally, at 8:45, Other Business and Minutes Approval. Okay, with that being said, mail, Mr. Bergman.
Yes, Madam Chair. The first, or the only item we have in the mail packet for tonight is a letter, annual letter from Neshoba Valley Technical School District inviting projects that we can have their students work on for carpentry and cabinet making, culinary arts, electrical technology. Stop right there. Where's Scott? He didn't get it. Design and visual communications and plumbing and heating. So we'll circulate this to the departments and see what suggestions they have, and that's it.
Very cool. All right, so now we have the LELD request to install mounted switch on Littleton Common, which we just came from a site visit right before this meeting to take a look at some proposals and talk about some options. Keith, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, when the board last met in a meeting on this topic, you tabled a request from the Littleton Electric Department for a permanent mounting of or pad-mounted switch, and you scheduled a site inspection for tonight for us to look at a temporary solution, as well as to talk about perhaps some other longer-term alternatives. So we just completed a site inspection, and I guess maybe I'd offer to, if Scott Edwards wants to try to sum up where he understands we are.
That'd be great.
Yeah, sure. I kind of got the sense that we have a good permanent solution picked out, but, got the sense from, people that were there that it's probably not the best permanent solution. So what we would like to ask for tonight is the temporary solution that we presented out there, which would be to bury a junction cabinet in the on the edge of Meeting House Road and get cable in there this fall, which would serve as a temporary cable in case this underground switch does fail this winter. And then we're going to work more towards a permanent solution, whether it's an easement on public or a private property, or a different spot in the common or something like that for this pad-mounted switch next year. So that's, I think that's kind of sums up where we're at.
Okay, so I think just from my perspective, we had a dual need here. Number one, obviously, it's really important for us to provide continuous electricity to one of our major customers, IBM and others that are down there. Number two, we want to kind of preserve the look and feel of our common. We heard some concerns from the Garden Club, Rotary Club, others on location and what it might do to the aesthetic nature of our common. So, and that's where we come up with short-term, long-term. Anything you want to add, Keith?
Madam Chair, if it's okay,
Absolutely.
if I could just show on the map
Go for it.
what my viewpoint is. I think that Scott had pointed out, this is the temporary box that we're talking about right now. What I'd like to see, and what I'd like to see in the motion, is that the light department, with our help, pursue buying land or getting some kind of easement right in that area that Keith is doing. We should put it across the street, keep it completely off the common. So if it's okay with the board, that's what my motion, or whoever makes a motion, would be.
Absolutely. Board members, any comments?
I'm writing down stuff
Okay.
for motion.
I think just for the purpose of educating the public, the existing switch is up here. It's an underground manhole right along 119. Thanks, Keith. Actually, a big M. Manhole. Thanks. And the nature of the manhole, it's an old manhole. It's not watertight, and it's flooded, and the switch is in jeopardy of failing.
Needs to be addressed immediately.
Needs to be addressed to service all customers beyond that point, IBM being one of the bigger ones, but also to make sure that we don't put any of our workers in jeopardy. Did I buy enough time?
You're pretty close. And the nice thing about it, of the ABC proposals, this one's the least expensive of three, isn't it? 110, 95, and this one's 90.
Yeah.
So
That's right now, yeah.
that's a win from that perspective also. When we were out there with the garden club and with you all, we talked about landscaping around the temporary switch. So I'd like to be able to include that as part of our motion also, in addition to the permanent location that you suggest. If you like, before making the motion, I'll try this out with you and see if I'm coming close to what you want to hear. Okay, so the motion will go along the lines that the Board of Selectmen vote to approve Electric Light Department's amended request to install a pad-mounted switch on Littleton Common at proposed location Charlie, and that LAWD coordinate with the Garden Club to landscape in and around the temporary switch locations, funding to be provided by LAWD. Further, that the Board of Selectmen coordinate with LAWD to pursue a location for a permanent switch. Does that meet everybody's needs? Scott? Is that okay?
Yep.
Sound right to me?
All right. So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
I'll give you the words if you need. Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so moved. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, moving right along. Elder Human Services Need Assessment Report Presentation.
Give a handout?
Sure.
Can you pass this around?
Let me see. Do you have a magic stick here?
Yep.
Thank
Here you go.
Great. Could I swipe this chair? Thank you. All right. I'm going to sit down. I have a lot of slides, and I'm going to try to get through them without
Hey, thanks.
taking any more time than is necessary. So thanks for having me here. I'm happy to be here to talk with you about this undertaking that we've been involved in. So we were asked to do a needs assessment for Littleton Elder and Human Services and the Council on Aging. And what I'm going to be talking about tonight is really just giving you a very brief overview. I'm going to talk a little bit about the demographics that really in many ways prompt this study, but I'm going to structure my discussion of other findings around key recommendations, and I believe you all got copies of the report. Okay, so you saw the volume of information, and hopefully it will be helpful to you for some time to come. And again, I'm just going to be presenting a bit of those. Okay, so our goal with this study was to investigate and document current and future needs and preferences of Littleton's older resident. Our primary focus was on the Council on Aging, but necessarily we also talked about other aspects of the community, other things that are in Littleton that are considered to be amenities. The methods started with some demographic analysis based on data from the U.S. Census Bureau, and we added some projections from the Donahue Institute. We did a resident survey. All residents of Littleton who were age 50 and over were eligible to participate, and a response rate of 30% was received, so we had more than 1,000 responses. We did a focus group with representatives from organizations that work with older adults to get their perspective on these issues. I did 5 key informant interviews with the town administrator, representative Board of Selectmen, Mr. Knox, the fire chief, the police chief, and outreach staff of Littleton Department of Elder and Human Services. And we also did some Council on Aging comparisons with 4 other communities. So talking first about some of the demographic issues, this is just a slide that shows where you all have been and where you're expected to go with respect to your age structure. This suggests very clearly, if, just to sort of orient people, the top line, the purple piece of this graph is the 80-plus population, and the green is the 60 to 79 population. You can see very clearly that's expected to grow rather dramatically. Here's another chart that looks at these same kinds of numbers, but puts it in terms of the numbers of people, and you can see that the upward trajectory in the over 60 population that's been occurring at a lower level up to this point over the last 25 years is expected to continue rather dramatically. And that is paired with a much slower growth or perhaps slight decline of the under 60 under 60 population. And so what you're expected to see in terms of the total population is a slight increase in the size of the population, but the share of that population that's 60-plus is expected to grow from about 20% or a little bit more now to nearly 40%. So you're going to have a slight increase in the number of people living here. You're going to have a dramatic increase in the number of people who are 60-plus. One last thing before I turn to the recommendations piece and the data that supports that, something from the survey was to comment that Littleton seniors are committed to aging in place. We heard a lot in the survey about how much residents love living here and how much they value the many amenities in the community. More than half of the seniors in Littleton who responded to our survey have lived here for at least 35 years. People feel safe here, and they're committed to aging in place. So more than half of the people, the seniors, reported that it was very important for them to stay here as they grow older, and most of the rest of them said it was somewhat important. So in other words, the older people here have lived here for a long time. They've built the community. They want to stay in place. I would note that the respondents in their 50s are only slightly less committed. About 71% say it's either very important or somewhat important for them to stay here. So that suggests that as far as they can tell us right now, they're wanting and expecting to stay here as well, and that's an important part, accounting for why you're going to see a growing older population. Okay, so against that background, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the recommendations. And the first set of recommendations really speak to the community rather than just the Council on Aging. People in the aging world talk about building stronger communities for older people as a basis for building livability of communities in general. And as you can anticipate, when you make a community strong and supportive for older people, you're making it a better community for people of all ages. And so part of our work is really focused on that, those broader themes in Littleton related to livability. Some of those recommendations have to do with housing and building housing options and creating opportunities for people to stay in their homes. Part of the recommendations relate to transportation concerns, and the last set of recommendations relates to community-based long-term services and supports. Starting first in terms of offering support for maintaining and adapting homes, and the way these slides are structured, just so you know, is we had an open-ended question where people were asked, what are some of your concerns about staying here as you get older? And so where you've got italics, quote-looking things, that's from that open-ended question. And so we heard, frankly, a lot, as you would expect, as I'm sure you hear every time you have a meeting. We heard a lot about taxes. All right, so older people are concerned about taxes and being able to stay here because taxes they feel are too high. And this quote is nice because it links the tax issue to children living elsewhere and difficulty maintaining their homes. So that's really a cluster of concerns that older residents have. So we heard some about that. We also heard from residents that they're worried about their ability to keep up their homes and to modify their homes. So among the senior respondents, and again, those are the people 60 and over, more than 1/4 of them live in homes that require some kind of modification in order for them to stay where they are. But more than 1/4 of those who said they needed modifications said they can't afford them. So that paired concern about my home really is not suitable for me as I get older, but I can't afford to change it. So this this finding supports the recommendation that offering support to Littleton seniors who need those home modifications by connecting them to service providers, programs. Sometimes the issue is money, sometimes the issue is knowing who to trust when they're looking for providers for help in modifying their homes. Those kinds of things can help them improve home safety and promote stability of neighborhoods in which they live. Another thing we heard about was the frustration many older residents have in terms of thinking about I'd like to stay here, but there's really no place for me to live if I want to downsize. So again, we heard a number of quotes about that, people writing in those kinds of concerns, but we also heard that they really didn't see the opportunities to do that in Littleton. So things like single-floor living, housing with services like independent living or assisted living, housing in walkable areas, we heard about those things over and over, and that's a concern because those opportunities are limited in Littleton. So having a mix of housing that's suitable for aging in place, including housing with services and some low-cost housing would be beneficial. And we did hear from residents that if they were required to leave their home because it wasn't suitable for them, where would they like to go? And there was some receptivity to assisted living, independent living, as well as apartments or condos. Again, especially in terms of the condos in a walkable area close to amenities that they enjoyed. I would note that this is consistent, these findings are consistent with a recently released Littleton Housing Production Plan that identifies ways to meet broader community goals while simultaneously responding to the housing needs of Littleton's aging population. So this, to me, suggests there's an opportunity there to meet multiple goals for the community. We heard a lot about transportation. We heard a lot of concerns about Littleton being heavily a driving community, a community where you really did need to drive in order to live here. This was a concern because, indeed, alternative transportation options are limited. Many areas of town aren't walkable. I will say we heard a lot about walkability. We heard about frustration with bicycling. So it wasn't just driving, but there's a broader concern about transportation options in this community. Yet we also found that many Littleton seniors don't drive, including 1/4 of respondents who are age 80 and over. And many of those who do drive with modifications. So we asked people who drove, what are some of the things that you modify in your getting around this area? And we heard about things like not taking left-hand turns, not driving at night, not driving out of town, not going on the highway, things that you can imagine as accumulate become very limiting in terms of their ability to get out, come to events like this after dark, go to out-of-town medical appointments, things like that. And those limitations and struggles with transportation do have consequences for people. We asked people, did you have to miss, cancel, or reschedule a medical appointment within the last year because of lack of transportation? And among the most vulnerable respondents, we found some loss of medical service as a result of transportation concerns. So for the people who were 80 and over, more than 10% of them said that they did indeed miss or have to reschedule a medical appointment, 30% of the non-drivers, and 8% of those who drive with modifications. So that suggests that there are consequences to the transportation challenges in the community. Community and long-term services and supports are also important in securing quality of life and promoting aging in place. In the survey, we learned a lot about older residents who need support in their homes. We asked people, what kinds of supports do you need? Do you need help getting around? Do you need help doing your yard work? That kind of thing. And we heard that many of the older residents did indeed require that kind of support. We also asked about people who were providing support, so the caregiver issue. And we learned that a very large share of both people in their 50s as well as seniors provide some kind of care or have provided some kind of care within the last 5 years. So nearly half of the respondents in their 50s and about 40% of seniors provided care or assistance within the last 5 years to a person who's disabled or frail. A majority of those caregivers found the experience to be very or somewhat challenging. We asked them what was what condition did the person that they provided care for have that prompted that care, and it was a long list of chronic disease, people with cancer, people with heart disease, a lot of people with Alzheimer's. Some people said they're just old, so there's that sort of frailty piece of caregiving, just a lot of caregivers reporting their experience. And again, many of them found the experience very or somewhat challenging. Among caregivers, 35 to 45% indicated that a caregiver respite program would be helpful to them or their families if it were available in Littleton.
Could you describe what that is, the caregiver respite
program? A lot of communities have some kind of program where essentially the care recipient can come and spend the day or spend the morning, have lunch, have some activities. There is a program, what's it called?
It's our Littleton Social Club.
Littleton Social Club. There is a program like that here. It's fairly small, correct? Yes, fairly small and limited, yes. But essentially, you know, not only does that provide an opportunity for the person who perhaps has dementia or has some kind of very serious needs that may limit their getting out of the house and doing things, but it also is frankly, a godsend for the caregiver. Okay. The last point before we turn our attention to the Council on Aging is to just recognize pockets of vulnerability. Like many communities around here, Littleton is a fairly well-off community. It's a community where most of the older people, as well as the younger people, are doing pretty well. They have reasonably acceptable incomes, they're doing okay in terms of their health, they're getting out, they're involved in the community. In this type of community, it's easy to forget that there are people who do have significant needs. In terms of income security, for instance, 38% of householders age 65 and older have incomes under $25,000. So even though there are a chunk of Littleton seniors who have incomes that are fine, $75,000 above, $100,000 above, 38% of them have what I think anyone would regard as low income. 40% of Littleton seniors age 75 and over have at least one disability, and we learned from our community survey that meaningful numbers, less than 10%, but still 5 to 8% of the seniors have what could be regarded as isolation concerns. They're not getting out very often. So these are people that need to be, the community needs to be aware that they exist, and the community needs to put programs in place for them. Okay, turning now to the Littleton Elder and Human Services and Council on Aging. The first thing that we learned is that these units are regarded as community assets by the community. They're a source of services and activities, referral, leadership. They have important focus areas that really attach or are meaningful to older residents and help them age in place. And they offer a bridge between community amenities and residents who are aging in place. We learned that the existing services are highly valued and they're well regarded. We asked respondents to rate 22 programs and services according to their importance to the community, and we learned that all but 4 of the programs was rated as important by at least half of the responses, or the respondents. These are the most highly rated services among the 22 that we asked about. Transportation far and away is the most highly valued. And again, I want to remind you, this is not, the question wasn't about how important is this to you, but rather how important is this to the community. So it really was asking people to think about these services as providing value to the community, perhaps their own families, but also their neighbors, and amenities that a community like this should have. So transportation, nutrition services, including Meals on Wheels, health and wellness, assistance with local and state programs, and caregiving services. These were the most highly rated. And you can see there's actually quite a lot of consistency across the age groups here in terms of how highly rated these were. We also found fairly consistently high support by users of the Council on Aging, people who said they use the Council on Aging services and programs, as well as those who say they do not. And we also found fairly consistent high ratings for those who say they're familiar with the Council on Aging and those who are not, who are not familiar. And so that consistency, to me, suggests that these services are regarded as community assets and that they recognize the value of them, even if they don't use them personally. As you would expect, the likelihood of using the Council on Aging services and senior center services does increase with age. We see this in most communities that we work in. You see an escalation, particularly between people in their 60s and people in their 70s. Essentially, once people become more in need of elder services, they're more likely to seek the service part of what Councils on Aging and seniors do, and once people retire, they're more likely to start looking for the activities piece of what they do. So it all sort of converges usually between age 60 and 70, somewhere in there. But this upward trend, which again we see in all the communities that we work in, what this suggests that as your community gets older, you're likely to see expanded demand for the service. So you know the community is going to get older, and that suggests that you're going to have increased participation, increased demand for the services. Consistent with that expectation from just a demographic standpoint, we found that more than 60% of those who do not already participate in the Council on Aging rate their future participation as very or somewhat likely. So this is another indicator that people, your residents, are looking ahead and saying, well, I think it's important that those programs are out there. Many of them are using the services. Those who are not are looking ahead and saying, I'm glad they're there and I'm likely to use them myself. Having said that, we would also recommend that the community expand knowledge of the Council on Aging. Awareness of the Council on Aging could be improved, especially among younger residents. 7 out of 10 survey respondents age 80 plus were very or somewhat familiar with programs and services offered by the Littleton Council on Aging and the Senior Center, and half of those in their 60s and 70s were. But only a quarter of the respondents in their 50s were familiar. So broader dissemination of information about the Council on Aging and Senior Center would be beneficial in increasing awareness, increasing the value to the community. But we also asked about how would you like to receive information about the Council on Aging, because I know there's always this sort of impulse of the community to try to use the most effective and most cost-effective way of disseminating information. And what we learned, as you might expect, is that you're not ready to go all electronic yet. You need to hold off on that. The print media is still very important for your oldest residents, and so at least for the foreseeable future, you need to continue to disseminate information about the Council on Aging in print.
I think I said the senior broadcaster was the number
Yes.
one
Yes.
tool,
Yes.
communication.
And so people are aware of that, and they look for it, and it is a preferred source for many people. Yeah.
Interesting. Good.
Yeah. Finally, we looked at some comparison councils on aging. We looked at 4 communities of relatively similar size to Littleton, and a selection of the features is shown here. There's more in the report. On the basis of these features, it appears that the Littleton Council on Aging has less space and less financial support from the town than most of the other communities considered. Having said that, a very positive feature of the comparison is the substantial participation of volunteers in Littleton. That participation is considerably higher than in the comparison communities. And so in Littleton, volunteers appear to be helping to bridge the gap between service demands and the resources from the community. My last recommendation would be to strengthen partnerships between the Council on Aging and other town offices. And I want to emphasize that this is not because those partnerships do not appear to be working well. In fact, we learned that those partnerships are already very strong and working very well. We were very impressed in our communication, particularly with the fire department, the police department. They're working very closely with the Council on Aging. They get along well. They consult with each other. They know each other. So it's working very, very well in this community. But I think when you see it working so well, you realize that that's something to continue, that's something to support, and something to strengthen. So we learned that All of the town offices are being impacted by the increasing size of the older population, and those partnerships with the Council on Aging have been put in place to increase everyone's effectiveness. Yet again, as the senior population increases in number, that's just going to continue, and so building the mechanisms for strong communication and strong partnership will be important moving forward. And that is all I have to share with you. And thank you so much. Forgive me for rushing through. I didn't want to run out of time. So,
You did a great job. Thank you
Very
for all your
good.
work, and I thought your summary was spot on, really well, and well done and efficient. And before I open up to the board for comments, Pam, is there anything that you'd like to say or add?
It was such a pleasure to work with Dr. Mutchler and her group because they have worked with so many towns and have such a clear understanding of the issues that we're up against. They made this very, very easy. Probably the most important thing I should mention is that next Tuesday morning, we will be having a public meeting. And Dr. Mutchler and her team will be here and have the opportunity to ask questions of her and go into much more detail about the report.
we'll have lots of slides then.
Fantastic.
Very good.
And that's at what time and at what location?
It's at 10:30 in this room.
In this room. Thank you.
Okay, board, Joe, want to ask any questions, make any comments?
Doctor, it's nice to see you again, and thank you for the work you did. I think one of the biggest thing is, as far as I'm concerned, is that now we have documentations of a whole bunch of different subjects that we can refer back to from results that you've got from the community that we didn't have before, whether it's transportation, whether it's housing, assisted living, whatever. That's why I think we'll be going back to this and say, you know, on this page here, this was brought up. So this is going to be a very functional document. And just by chance, that our chairman's not here, but we got into this discussion yesterday about this, about the different aspects of it and what we could be doing as a whole board that we haven't had a chance to discuss from transportation and looking for some places to build senior housing and things like that. So already, just being out a short period of time, it has us thinking. I think it's a great job, so I want to thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. And Paul, I wrote down that part about printed materials is very important. I just wanted to...
Uh-oh, is this an issue?
Most senior among us.
I deserve that.
Ouch.
Chuck, any
No.
comments, questions? Oh, sorry, Paul, sorry.
I'll echo Joe's comments. Thank you very much for all involved. Just a few months ago, I was talking to Pam about what the needs are and just trying to get an understanding. I'm the newest member of the Board of Selectmen, and so I was trying to find out from her perspective. And we started talking about my mom. My mom's 75 years old. She lives on the second floor of a two-family home, and transportation is becoming more of an issue for us. So the same issues that my mom's dealing with down in Dedham are very real issues for the folks here in Littleton. So, my friends here in Littleton. And so transportation was something that very much stuck out to me. The need for walkability, I like that term. And, for us to be looking at opportunities. We were just at the Common tonight on a little field trip, and you look around and you see some opportunities for us to do some stuff where there might be some walkability. And respite care, I think Melissa had asked about, and I had a friend of mine whose dad was, they call it adult daycare, but I'd love to see something like that, whether it's at the Point or somewhere. There's private organizations that run these, and I don't know, maybe we can try to see if we can solicit some of those. I mean, there's plenty of daycares out there that run next generation for children and all that kind of stuff, but there are a number of programs available across the country. I don't know if there's much in Massachusetts, but this was down on the South Shore. I'm going to take it upon myself to kind of look into that and see if there's anything that we could try to attract, because we do have some space available that maybe we could partner with some of the healthcare providers around here or something. I'm not really sure. But thank you very much for all the time and effort, and it was an excellent summary. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Really appreciate it. And it is a good effort, and I was one of the people that did take the survey.
Oh, good.
I'm just over 50.
That's funny.
It is. And to Joe's point about paper, just last week, I was with the Council on Aging to speak about our master plan update, and just recently received the electronic version of this. And as we're having the conversation, just as you described, and as Joe has mentioned numerous times, the need for paper and to continue more traditional methods. And really, my first look at the report was on my handheld, a little Samsung, and I started reading that. Stopped rather quickly because I needed bigger pages, for sure. So certainly many different ways to do this. But I am one of those people, and if I may just direct your attention to one of your slides, please, because I've got a question. It's your third demographic slide, and it's growth among seniors will be paired with declines in younger residents.
Okay.
And just trying to get a little handle on the growth. On that chart, I'm one of those, when we look at 2010, I'm one of the 1746. And in 2020, I become one of the 2765. So I understand that we're all aging, and there's a good, somewhat gentrification in a way of the town, as you describe it. But my question is, we increased by 1,000 over those 10 years in the over 60, or 60 or older, and yet we only decreased the under 60 by less than 200. So how does that extra 800 growth occur? What makes that?
Well, you know, I mean, 2020, that is a projection, and so that's one thing that you should keep in mind, and it's based on what has happened, in this case, between 1990 and 2010. Okay, so it's assuming, I mean, there is some in-migration and out-migration. Okay, so some of the growth or decline in any population is people moving in and out, so it's actual loss and gain.
It actually gets to
And then-
crux my question.
Yeah, and then the rest of it would be aging in place.
Is your
Okay.
projection of there is migration into town?
Yes,
and that
you
might
are
be-
expecting, and these are not my projections, these are Donahue Institute, yeah. But they are consistent, I know that MAPC.
MAPC, the housing
yes.
study, had
Yes.
similar.
Those are fairly similar, and so that actually lends a lot of confidence to these projections, you know, they're not telling you
Oh,
anything
no, I'm not doubting the
different.
projection.
No, I'm
Actually,
not, I'm just
looking
understanding.
for the source of growth.
Yeah.
And your comment about migration, so we're even looking at migration of people in their later 50s and even in 60s migrating to town. And it's not just younger folks looking to start families.
That is part of the story.
right.
Generally, older people are far less likely to move
Correct.
than the younger people. And most of what you're seeing in terms of growth of the older population is people aging in place.
Yeah, just I saw that it grows by 1,000 in one,
Yeah,
but
I
the
know.
decrease in the other side of that is less than 200. So it would seem to suggest there's also migration in of more senior people.
Potentially.
Okay. Possibly, maybe.
Possibly, maybe.
Being a 40B up there doesn't necessarily, it brings in low income, it doesn't necessarily bring in low income, low age. It also brings in.
Well, certainly affordable, although looking at some of those rents, Fred, I'm not so sure about low income. Cheapest growth.
Yeah, okay.
No, thank you. Yeah, just want to try and get a handle on the migration piece.
I had
It is
one or two
challenging,
more
yes.
things though too. And why is the younger generation declining? What's going on?
Get busy.
Where are you in 2035? Which one are you in?
Done my part. Done my part.
Okay. Okay, it's just.
Because we're all sitting here just getting older.
Check, please.
Thank you one more time.
I apologize. It is so important to us. I mentioned the master plan update steering committee. Melissa and I are both on it, along with 10 other folks from our town. We are incorporating this into the master plan update as a piece of information for our consultant to be using
Great.
to inform him as we go forward. So,
Terrific.
thank you. Thanks.
You read my mind. That was one thing I was going to say. Absolutely. And thank you one more time. And thanks, Pam, to you and your team for your work here and the key informants, those that participated, and as well as the public, anyone that gave responses, because you see how important this input is. It helps us guide our decision-making, understand what's important, input into master plan. So we got, I think, 15 areas of recommendations. Some we kind of already knew, like you mentioned, housing production plan told us we had to address housing. So good to get things confirmed, and then we learned some new stuff as well. So I'd really encourage folks to spend some time with this. There were some really interesting facts, and you mentioned them already, but, you know, for instance, I really like seeing that more than 90% of survey respondents feel completely or very safe in Littleton. You can quickly see the top concerns. 38% of seniors have income below $25,000 a year. That really made me stop for a second. So a lot of good information in here. Keith, I don't know if there's anything, I guess the only other thing I'd say is 15 recommendations. Now we need to work and figure out how to action on them and what are the next steps with addressing each of these areas.
So I would suggest that after your public meeting, is it one or is it multiple public meetings?
Just one.
Okay, and it will come back to the Council on Aging for further discussion, and then perhaps after that, you'll come back to the Board of Selectmen with a set of recommendations, and we can talk about how to implement that. And it's perhaps not coincidentally, budget requests for fiscal 2017 will be due before too long, later at the end of next month, and then in the following month of November, we'll be reviewing, the Selectmen and Finance Committee jointly will be reviewing all budget requests for the coming year. So the timing is fortuitous there. And just on the matter of budget, and I did get a note from Bonnie, just on one number, that the number is $118,499, which is the adjusted budget for the Council on Aging for the current fiscal, for fiscal 15.
That's
Yeah.
what we adjusted it in the
Yes.
last fiscal year.
And then this year's number is based on that. So we got out of the 80s.
Just in time. Very good.
So Maynard is all by itself on that. That's right, so. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Very good, thank you.
All right. Right on time. 7:15, public input. Anybody have anything they want to share with us tonight? Nope, okay. Members, Paul. Do you have nothing today?
I do have something. I've received a few phone calls with people asking about Little Box Solar, and I've tried to do some research on it. I see that there's a Littleton website, it's Littleton and Boxborough jointly. What I'm a little confused about is there's no involvement with Littleton Electric Light, but the Sustainability Committee is promoting Little Box Solar. I don't know if there's an opportunity for us to agenda Little Box Solar so that we can educate the public.
Yeah, we were planning on doing it tonight, but I was asked to put it on for October.
Because was it something that was worked on, I think May was when the RFP went out, right? With Littleton and Boxborough?
Yes, this board voted to support the participation in a procurement that the town of Boxborough is putting out.
Let's piggyback on it. Okay.
Yeah, as I recall, we did vote on agreeing with it, not to authorize it, because we were told we really had no authority to
Right,
authorize it.
yeah.
So we agreed it was a good idea, and at that time, we also asked that at some point in the future, Scott could come to us and tell us more from the LEW perspective as to what it was about. And was that to occur tonight if we had not moved it? Is that your point?
No, that we had not agendaed the LELD to come back and talk to us about it.
Is that the right team to come back? Or is it this the same?
We can do that if you like. I know the questions that were posed at the time had more to do with how the rate structure or the rebate and so on fits in with that, and I don't...
Sorry, one of the questions was, because it was $100,000 was mentioned as the grant, and the question was, where is the $100,000 coming from? And the folks in the audience that evening did not know the source of the $100,000, and has not been communicated to us.
Well, but that was a rebate program, which my understanding was not implemented.
It was not, no.
Right. So there's no 100,000 to be sourced from anywhere.
So that's a very big change from
Yeah.
what we did have that evening. So your question to have it repurposed, so to speak. in a future-
I'd just like to have a better understanding for myself,
Yeah,
and I think
get an
there's a lot of
update.
people in town that would like to have a better understanding, because I've had people ask me, and I honestly, I've tried to educate them based on what I know, but New England Clean Energy seems to be a for-profit organization. and it appears that they're the ones that won the bid with the town of Boxborough, and they're the ones that, I believe, own the website, Little Box Solar. So I want to try to understand as much as I can, and if we're going to be promoting it, I want to understand what the liability is for the town if, in fact, if it works out, great. If it doesn't work out, what's the liability for the town if we're pushing and promoting it? So I want to have a full understanding of it.
Be happy to have this on our next agenda, and if Scott's not able to be there, maybe just a briefing on what the current status of the rate structures and the rebate programs as they affect the residential solar installations.
Come in and talk about that, sure.
Yeah, because I think any renewable energy is,
Net metering in general would be very useful also.
yeah.
Yeah,
With caps.
what we are doing on October 6th is, that's the night when we'll have the application for the Green Communities program.
Good time.
It'll be an energy reduction plan that Scott and his department have been instrumental in helping to craft, and so that would be a good time to come back and talk.
Thanks.
Mike, comment from your side?
We'll-
Introduce yourself.
Michael Zeldin, 11 Loanne Street. It just so happens that I became very interested in solar, and so a few months back, I did some groundwork for it, and I called the local Littleton Electric, and it turns out they're not in the business of solar, except they have a little pilot that they're using. And as far as they're concerned, the way it was presented to me, very politely, is that that's not their business. Their business is they buy power from others. In other words, they're on the grid. They buy power from the grid, and they distribute it. And if you put a solar, the Littleton Boxborough thing is for private citizens, period. They go to their house and they do that.
Commercial.
They basically, you pay them outright, basically, to put a system on the roof. We're in the weeds, but the basic idea is if you have it, what is required now under, there are regulations for this, very clearly specified. The grid demands a certain amount of payment as the total
Yeah,
thing, all right?
I
It has
understand.
nothing, it was presented to me that the Littleton Electric Light is not in that business, they couldn't care less. It was not,
Well, I'm not certain that's entirely the case, Mike. I think that the commissioners have looked at it, and I think they have some plans in place to investigate it, and you mentioned pilot. I think that, to say that they have no interest in it, I think is...
I'm reporting what they said. They have the pilot does not look economically, quote, feasible to them.
Okay, and I guess...
That's all I'm pointing out to you is,
But this will all come up when they do their
Yep.
report.
they have no
Yeah.
incentive, is what I'm saying, to
Okay,
do much of
gotcha.
anything.
We got you.
Competition.
We'll talk about it at our next meeting, and then we can hash it out a little bit more. Do you have anything else?
Did I have anything else? Just relative to the Association of Town Finance Committees, we got invited to that as members. I'm just looking for some input from you guys to see if you've been able to attend one of these, or Keith, maybe you can give me some input on
The
these.
Finance Committee goes to that, and you guys get to go to the Selectmen's.
Right.
You get to go to the managers.
But I was the guy.
If you want to go on a Saturday, I'd be more than happy to give you my seat.
As an honorary finance.
Okay, you didn't get the memo, here's the Board of Selectmen selectee.
I was absent that day, just like the day that I got voted to the Personnel Board.
There's no conference.
I'll talk to you offline, and maybe. All right, thanks.
Just one thing, I mentioned it last week, I'll mention it again. This Friday is the banquet and the golf tournament for the Castle in the Trees. And I just want to thank the group that's working on that to make that playground happen. It would be easy to sit back and try to get funds from other places, but they're actively out there raising funds for that purpose. So that golf tournament is Friday, the banquet's at 6 o'clock, and they have a DJ afterwards. So tickets are still available, and you get it through there. Just go onto Facebook and find their page.
Very good. Excellent. Not much from my side, except that our chair is at a work engagement, and so you have me. I have a cold. Sorry, my voice is a little scratchy. And that's about it, so we can continue on. And a little early, but that's okay, right?
Well, there may be others that are coming for the 7:30
maybe want to
matter, and so we might want to just take some of the ones out of order. I would bet Sam would love to have us take up the
Library.
library processing clerk now rather than an hour from now.
6B. Let's do that.
It's 6B1.
6B1.
And this is a request to fill a vacancy under your policy, and Sam.
Good evening.
Hi, thank you for receiving me. So, one of our senior librarians, Betty Smith, retired after over 40 years of working for us, and so that created a vacancy. I feel after reviewing the position that it's really, we can probably fill it with a lower graded position. Betty was a grade 9, step 5. I think we can get away with filling with a library processing clerk. It would be a new position for the library. Personnel committee recently graded it at a 3. So I'd like to get permission to fill that position at a grade 3 for 10 hours a week. And the position would be for basically assisting our assistant director with technical services. Technical services basically covers books, processes the books. Basically, all the books that you see in our library catalog, they get in there because of our technical services department. They cover the books, they put it into the system, they create the mark records for the books. So this position would help support my assistant director who does the majority of that work.
Okay, great. And by repositioning that, it wouldn't cause any other gaps. You'd be fine with.
Yes, Betty was already working 10 hours a week, so this, her position was about $17,000, budgeted for about $17,000, and this new position would be about $8,000 or $9,000.
Okay, great. So you basically looked at the gap, also looked at the landscape of what needed to be done, came up with a better proposal that will save us money. Sounding pretty good to me. Board, Paul?
The body show through 16 and 17, no impact to health insurance. Would that be the foreseeable future also?
Yes,
Okay,
because
thanks.
this is a non-benefit eligible position.
No, I think, appreciate you being creative, and if the need's not there, I'm not just grabbing for it because it's there. All set.
Me as well. I'm looking for a motion.
Move that the Board of Selectmen vote to grant the library director's request under the staffing vacancy review policy to fill part-time, non-benefit eligible grade 3 library processing clerk by posting both internally and externally.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right.
We could do,
Some salt?
yeah, we could do 6C,
All right.
salt.
Living so close to the
It's
ocean.
an annual contract.
Somehow figure that out. Okay. So,
And we've got the same per ton price this year as we did last year.
It's off the state's procurement contract. H95, same price as last fiscal year, so we're going in the same collaborative process.
okay. So, no change, really, nothing unusual. Business as usual. Any questions on this one? Barb?
How did we do? How did we do with our salt supply last year? Did we end up exhausting it, or anything, granular too left over?
We use it, we order it right away. We got to a point it started to get pretty sketchy, but we had enough supply to get us through, and then they replenished. I mean, we fill the shed when we're done. There's plenty of towns that run their shed to nothing, and now they start the new year with zero. So July 1st, they go spend $50,000 or $60,000 on salt. It just doesn't really make any sense to me. It's undercover, it doesn't go bad.
Right.
So we continue to buy it, and it got pretty tough. We tried to send our own trucks, and they wouldn't let us go down. So we do what we have to do.
But you never ran out, that's the important thing. Thank you.
And Jim committed not to have it snow so much this year, so he's going to save money.
Yeah, but the Farmer's Almanac didn't
No
commit to
problem,
that.
right?
Jim's a giver.
Select Board Trust.
Okay, thank you.
No? Nothing from either. I'd look for a motion.
Okay. Move that the Board of Selectmen vote to authorize execution of a memorandum of understanding to purchase off the VEH 95 State Road Salt Contract fiscal year 2016 at $67.85 per ton.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. Thank you, Jim. Thanks for being proactive. Okay.
Looks like we've got more people here now for, looks like a quorum
All right.
for 7:30 even.
Okay, number 5, stormwater management. Something that I know a bit about, just because Long Lake has a stormwater runoff project that's pretty neat. So, all right, sorry.
So we've got Fred Sivian here from DEP. Fred is the stormwater coordinator is it for the Worcester region, or is it?
For the entire
The
state.
entire state. I thought as much, but I didn't want to get that wrong. But I met Fred at a training that was held at the Worcester office recently as part of a long learning curve, steep learning curve to teach municipal officials about what seems to be coming down the pike for an EPA permit that will affect municipalities in many municipalities in Massachusetts, including Littleton. So we have invited members of a number of town boards who are going to join us on this journey. We see Conservation, Planning, Health, FinCom, and the electric, the Water Department is here. So this is the most folks we've seen from the Light and Water Department here in one. So appreciate being here. We have Town Council. The RAs in Harrington has had a number of clients who've already been dealing with this issue in one form or another. And as I say, we're on a steep learning curve. I should frame it that in Littleton we've actually got 2 issues that we have to deal with. One is to prepare, along with many other communities, for the new EPA permit that's coming next year. The other is sort of look over our shoulder and look behind to make sure that we're in compliance with our existing 2003 EPA permit, which may require some regulations or bylaw amendments that we will address in the context of special town meeting. But Fred, I think when he saw the long look on my face, he said, well, I can come to your town, and that's what I do to sort of familiarize communities with what's coming down. So I jumped at that opportunity and really delighted to have Fred Sivian here tonight to walk us through the world of municipal waste stormwater rules in Massachusetts. And I'll turn over your badge of office here with the
Thank you.
forward and back.
All right,
Great.
thanks very much.
Thanks,
I
Fred.
think what I'll do is just sit here. I want to make sure what I say is for people at home that are listening. I also didn't want to sit with my back to everyone here. Make me fairly uncomfortable.
Is it that contentious?
No, it's like an umpire will, when he's wiping off the plate, will turn his rear end in the correct direction, not toward the crowd, and I want to emulate that. Thank you, Keith. My name's Fred Sivian. I work for Mass DEP, which means I work for you. I'm the Massachusetts Stormwater Coordinator. My job, the past 7 or 8 years, has been to explain federal, state, and local rules to anybody who calls to find out what those rules are, and to try to also influence those rules so they make more sense for people. I answer questions from developers, from conservation commissions, from DPWs, from water departments about how our Massachusetts stormwater rules work. What Mr. Bergman asked me to do tonight was to come and explain to you about stormwater. I'm unsure of the sort of level of understanding that people have about stormwater, so I apologize if I'm going over things that are already known to some of you. You should feel free to scoot me along, Selectmen, or to tell me to slow down, either way. So I'll just start in. Also, I think if you have any questions, or through the acting chair, if anyone else has any questions as I'm giving my presentation, you should feel free to ask. I'm here to provide information for you. So I'm old enough to have been on the first Earth Day back in 1970. And what surprised me is learning about stormwater is that we've done a really good job of reducing the amount of pollution that comes from the very small number, relatively small number of large pipes. The large industrial pipes we used to have, the emissions would go directly into streams. Some streams would turn color depending on what day of the week it was. Our wastewater treatment plants, we've done a really good job of clamping down on the pollution of those major sources. But when we look at the quality of our rivers and streams, they're still polluted. They're still more polluted than federal and state water rules require. What we found is that stormwater is the single largest source of water pollution statewide. It's the one thing that has more pollution in it than any other particular source. That was pretty surprising to me. The parts of the environment that are affected by stormwater are up on the screen here. The thing to remember about a stormwater system, which you have in Littleton, is unlike wastewater treatment plants, stormwater systems do not have any treatment in them. Whatever you put into the catch basins ends up going into rivers and streams. We had some work in my town. I'm on the Conservation Commission in Dedham, where I live. We had some work in our town to try to discover why there were a lot of pollutants going into the Charles River, popped some tops on some catch basins, and found literally hundreds of blue bags of dog waste. What people were doing was they thought they were doing the right thing, picking up the dog waste, making sure it's in the bag, and then tossing it in a place they thought would be safe. But in this case, it was a great way of putting pollutants back into rivers and streams. That's how our stormwater systems were originally designed, to gather water away from buildings, to gather it away from roads, to gather it into culverts, keep it away from bridges, and put it directly in the rivers and streams as efficiently as possible. But what we're finding is that pollutants that stormwater gathers when it runs into the rivers and streams end up causing pollutant problems. Got some pictures here about, this is an urbanized area. The reason I put that in quotes is when EPA looks at towns to see whether they qualify for the Massachusetts stormwater permit that EPA issues, requires towns to get. They looked at the urbanized area of a town. I've got a slide a little bit later that's a map from EPA about what they think the urbanized area is in Littleton. So my town, Dedham, almost all of my town is urbanized area. It looks like from the map, most of Littleton is urbanized area. Some other towns just have a small amount of urbanized area. But whenever you have EPA finds urbanized area, in general, they require this permit. Some parts of the state have problems with water supply, both for human uses and also for rivers. This is from 10 years ago in the Ipswich River. The drought combined with a lot of withdrawals of water ended up drying up the river. Usually, or without development, what happens is that rainwater will fall, it'll hit the earth, some of it will run off, and some of it will go into the ground. It goes into the ground and ends up through underground seepage, feeding the rivers and streams. When we build developments, put impervious surface on developments, the rainwater, instead of seeping into the ground, goes off stream pretty quickly. And that, in its most extreme, can cause problems with water going directly into the rivers and streams. Not enough water. This year I signed up for the Charles River Swim in June. It's a 1-mile swim. It was canceled this year in June. It's rescheduled for July because of too much bacteria in the water. It's common in Charles River. It's common in other areas of the state. It's much less common here. I did some work on looking at how many impaired waters Littleton has. In other words, what rivers and streams, ponds, are polluted more than federal state rules require. You'll find all sorts of things. We have the Mother Brook in Dedham is a historically important river and that connects the Charles and the Ponset River watersheds. We go fishing there and find things like the shopping cart, things like that. So what pollutants are in stormwater? Basically whatever you find on the ground. They can be nutrients, and these are things that most people think of them as being fertilizers, but remember in the spring when the trees start shedding that yellow stuff that comes on the ground, most of us, some of us at least, start having our asthma attacks and all. That stuff that falls from the trees contains a lot of phosphorus in it. That goes into rivers and streams. It's also fertilizers, leaves, there's sediments, all sorts of things. Whatever is on a hard surface, a roof, a road, gets washed into rivers and streams. This slide is, the reason I put this up here, it violated my rule of not having too many words on a slide, but it's surprising all the sources of it. People tend to think of stormwater pollution as coming from excess fertilizer that we put on the roads, or on our grass, on our landscape, and it gets washed into the streets. There's a good deal of phosphorus that comes from motor vehicles, both transported in, emissions coming from the Midwest into Massachusetts and settling onto our roofs or streets, and also vehicle exhaust locally. So there are lots of different sources of it. From DEP's point of view, what we're required to do is to make sure that we test rivers and streams to see what the levels of pollutants are. And if their levels are higher than what federal, state, or local federal, state rules require, then we note that stream as being impaired. It's got too much pollution in it. We can look at all the sources of it. What we found generally is it's stormwater because it comes from things that come to be located on roofs, that come to be located on our streets, washes into rivers and streams. That's how it all gets there. So what harm comes from stormwater? Basically, I talked earlier about the increased speed of runoff from a development. When we build a development, it's certainly not that we all do developments all over the Commonwealth. You have those in your town, other towns also. They're not bad things. But depending on how you manage that stormwater, the stormwater can refrain from recharging into the ground, into your water supplies. Let me ask, where do you get your water in Littleton?
Groundwater.
Yeah, groundwater, so it's pumps. Okay. We had a problem in Dedham with the water going into the rivers and streams and not going into our aquifer. So our aquifer was, by our Dedham Westwood Water District figures, was becoming stressed. We had to hook up to the MWRA in order to make sure we had an adequate supply of water. So at its most extreme, it can end up affecting the amount of water that you have. I showed some pictures earlier of algae blooms. Sometimes you'll get aquatic plants growing in your streams, more likely in your ponds. That's an indicator you've got too many nutrients going into the river and stream. I went kayaking the Charles River Memorial Day weekend and found a part of the river where there are lots of plants. You sort of had to muck your way through it. It was kind of like a soup. That's an indication there's just too much pollution coming into these places.
Were there more occasions of, say, toxic algae bloom this year in ponds and
Yeah, it's rare that those kind of cyanobacteria blooms happen in moving water.
Yeah.
They're more associated with ponds and still water. The lower basin of the Charles had an attack of that about 3 weeks ago. It was luckily a window open enough for people to be able to swim a little bit. But ideally, we'd be able to swim in our rivers and streams. We'd be able to fish in our rivers and streams. One of the studies I remember seeing from our colleagues at Fish and Game, they found that anytime you have an increase in the amount of impervious surface, anytime you add a road, add a development and all, you have a decrease in your water quality of your stream. There's no threshold effect. There's no limit under which there are no bad effects. You start getting bad effects. So it all ends up how you manage the stormwater. I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself right now, but the main way you manage stormwater is to require stormwater to be kept on site as much as possible. That's the reason why behind some of EPA's proposed rules, what they're going to be requiring towns to do. Again, it's a statewide issue. This slide shows water protection, water supply protection areas across the state. So when EPA looks at these slides, areas that need to be protected for human use, they're very concerned about the amount of pollutants that are coming from stormwater. There are wetlands all over the state. About 5% of the state is wetlands. Through your Conservation Commission, has rules that have been in place since 1997 that manage stormwater in a particular way when development occurs next to wetlands. So it might add parenthetically, your Conservation Commission is a great source of rules for stormwater because they've been doing it for so many years. I talked earlier about stress basins. These are water supply, water areas where there isn't enough water for the streams, where are either restrictions on the amount of water that you can pump, or water companies restricting, or water districts restricting the amount of water that individuals can use. And then the red in this slide are impaired waters across the Commonwealth. So, what is this MS4 permit? What is it going to be requiring the towns to do? There have been rules in place that require towns to manage stormwater. Most of the larger towns in Massachusetts, 240 out of the 351 towns, have these kinds of permits. Since 2003, so you folks have been doing the stormwater management over this time. The trigger is whether you've got an urbanized area or not. In other words, an area that has been defined by EPA as containing enough people, enough density to where stormwater rules are required. The standard that EPA is holding towns to is that the discharges have to meet federal and state clean water laws. And that's a big issue to Mass DEP. The reason it's a big issue to Mass DEP, and I'm going to get a little bit in the weeds here from a policy perspective, is it's one thing to require a town to take specific steps to be able to manage stormwater. It's quite another thing to also require that town to make sure that whatever comes out of its stormwater pipes meets federal and state clean water laws. Because every town, at some point during the year, violates federal, state clean water laws. So we have a concern, DP's point of view, about EPA moving this from a BMP-based permit, best management practices, do these particular things, and you've met the requirements of the permit, to where you can meet all the requirements of the permit, but if you also are found to violate any federal, state clean water law, that puts towns at risk.
And so we are classified as an urbanized area, I take it?
Most of Littleton is. I think I dropped one of the slides because of sides constraints.
Next one.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. This is how EPA sees Littleton. DP sees it this way too sometimes.
We see red when we see EPA.
Yeah. And it is red, and it's crosshatched too. The crosshatched red areas are what EPA regards as being an urbanized area. This MS4 permit, Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System permit, says that your town, in order to get permission to discharge stormwater from this urbanized area, must have a permit from the EPA. It's not an optional thing. The rules for the MS4 permit apply within the crosshatched area. The rules do not apply, from EPA's perspective, into the white area. That's not urbanized area. You can, as a town, decide to apply those stormwater rules in that area or not. That can get pretty confusing sometimes. The town of Ipswich has 3 sets of stormwater rules. One set for the urbanized area, another set for outside the urbanized area, and a third set is required by the state for wetlands jurisdictional areas. In my town of Dedham, we have one set of rules that applies across the town. Does this map look at all consistent to you folks who live here?
Partly.
The white area is all conservation land. Basically, so,
Good.
Constitutes urbanized. What's the definition? How's it determined?
The definition, the question is whether, what is urbanized area? It comes from the Census Bureau. So the Census Bureau has a definition of what an urbanized area is. I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's a specific density within a certain area.
population density.
Yep.
Yeah, I didn't think it was the hedgehogs.
It's fun, so
You could go by word circles too, there's different ways
I was
to look at
looking-
the risks are.
That's an overall one, Brad. I was looking at something a little bit more discreet, like, 10 per 1,000 square miles, 1,000 per 1 square mile, or something along those lines. But certainly we don't think of Littleton as urbanized. At least personally, I don't.
We're
Poor choice.
barely suburbanized.
Thickly settled? Not even.
It's not that.
17 square miles, 9,000 people.
Compared to someone.
It's public math, about 500 square mile.
We were, just in our goals last year, we were bucolic, right?
That's right.
Still are.
You got it. Anyway, thank you.
I took a lozenge.
Some of the smaller towns out in western Massachusetts are looking desperately to see if they have fewer than 1,000 people in their urbanized area. If they have fewer than 1,000 people, they qualify for a waiver from the program. So far, EPA has granted 8 waivers. There are others that other towns.
The state or the
submitted waivers
nation?
to. Pardon me?
8 waivers in the state or the nation?
In the state. Yeah, in most other states, this sort of program is run directly by the equivalent of the state DEP. In Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and 2 other states, the program is run directly by EPA. That has its advantages and disadvantages. There are really 2 parts of this permit. The one that you're operating under now since 2003 has been the so-called 6 minimum control measures. Again, I was saying earlier that DEP is concerned that the permit's being expanded to encompass both actions that towns have to take, so-called BMPs, best management practices, and will have to meet water quality standards. The permit you're under right now concentrates on the BMPs. They're in 6 areas. Your town has been doing this work for years. I went ahead and looked at the report that you filed under your town administrator's signature that says what the town has been doing. It looks like you've been doing a lot of outreach.
Prepared by the water department.
Mostly by the water department. So I mentioned the highway department in there too, and the selectmen and planning, and Clean Lakes Committee. But the bulk of the work by the water department, including a lot of outreach work, which is to be commended. But these 6 minimum control measures, basically you can classify the things that EPA was requiring towns to do in any of these 6 areas. The third one, illicit discharge detection and elimination, you already have that kind of program up and going. The purpose of an IDDE program is to identify stuff that isn't stormwater going into a stormwater system. The classic way to be able to discover that is to do some sampling during a dry weather period. If you haven't had any rain for 5 or 6 days, and you've got some liquid in your stormwater system, it's not coming from stormwater, it's coming from some other source. And in some of the more thickly settled parts of the state, that source that comes into the stormwater system could be connections from people's washing machines, could be connections from sump pumps, could be connections from a lot of different things. It could be groundwater coming in from pipes that are old. We found that in Dedham. They had a lot of leaky pipes that were taking groundwater and putting it into our stormwater system. EPA is concentrating to a great extent in its next permit on requiring significantly expanded illicit discharge detection and elimination program. I'm going to go over some of those high points in a few minutes. You also require towns to manage stormwater during construction. You're supposed to have a bylaw that manages stormwater erosion and sediment control. You have one of those. You're supposed to have a bylaw that manages what EPA calls post-construction. After a development is built, what happens to the stormwater? Are there any detention basins on the site? Are there retention basins? Is there any flood control? Those are supposed to be maintained. You already have one of those rules too. The 2003 permit also required good housekeeping for town facilities. In other words, if you have town facilities, you're supposed to have a town-wide plan for being able to track how you're doing at preventing stormwater pollution from your town facilities, like making sure the salt sheds have roofs on them. In Dedham, we had fought for almost 4 years with our DPW to finally get a roof over where they had the salt, located less than 25 feet from a stream. Rains would come, wash things directly into the rivers and into that particular stream. It's not a good situation. The new permit that EPA has proposed has these 6 minimum control measures, but has moved from a general requirement to a very much more specific set of requirements. I counted 252 separate reports, actions, and requirements in the proposed permit. So for example, with having construction bylaw, It's no longer good enough to have the kind of bylaw that you have adopted for the town. Your bylaw will have to require site inspections. It will have to require as-built plans to be kept in town. It'll have to require training for people that do site inspection. There are a lot of very specific requirements in this permit. I think the Central Massachusetts Regional Stormwater Coalition, is a group of towns that have banded together to do stormwater work, the Mass Municipal Association, and DEP all gave comments to EPA, telling EPA that it should find ways to reduce those numbers of administrative requirements. It's really a lot for a town to do, even a town that's well prepared as Littleton is. So any questions about what these 6 minimum control measures are?
I think it'd be interesting, like you mentioned, you kind of compared us to the 252 requirements. Where are gaps? Is it 252 of them? Or is it 50 of them? Or is it half of them?
Probably 2/3 of them, because most of those requirements that EPA is proposing are new. For example, illicit discharge detection elimination, why don't I get into that part of the permit? Requires an ordinance, which you have. It requires you to have an inventory of any sanitary sewers that a town has. You have to have your outfall inventory and mapping, which you probably already have. My favorite is catchment rankings. How many outfalls do you all have? Do you have any idea? Hundreds? That's generally the answer from towns, hundreds of them. Each one of them has to be ranked as being a priority for scrutiny to see if there are any non-stormwater discharges coming into that stormwater system, or something as a low priority. You have to track your progress. You have to do screening, both dry weather and wet weather sampling. The amount of dry weather sampling you have to do with DEP regarded as being reasonable. Again, it gets back to common sense. If you've got wet liquid coming out of a stormwater pipe and it hasn't rained, you've got something else going into it, and it's good to check that out. EPA is also requiring wet weather sampling. The wet weather sampling is not going to be required at all outfalls, but it is going to be required at many of them. And what that will do is provide EPA with information on how many pollutants are in that stormwater system during a storm. DEP's opinion about that is that's not taking a snapshot of a particular storm event that has particular pollutants in it at a certain time isn't a good indicator of whether the system is operating as it should or not. When do illicit discharges need to be fixed? In other words, when you find an illicit discharge, you're supposed to fix it within 60 days. That sounds reasonable on the face of it, but imagine you're a town employee, you do a dry weather sample at an outfall, and you find some residue that looks like it's got some phosphorus in it and indicators that there's somebody's washing machine hooked up to it. You go from that outfall up to, and then you've got 30, 40 different houses. You've got to explore through those houses and find out where that particular illicit discharge is coming from. That's the model. To be able to do this within 60 days is what towns tell us is very difficult to do. Some are going to be easy, but some are going to be extremely difficult to find and cure. You have to immediately start working on it and diligently pursue it until it's gone. EPA itself estimates that about 40% of the increased costs for this permit are going to come from illicit discharge and detection and elimination. They have a point. Since stormwater systems do not have any treatment in them, whatever's going into that stormwater system is going into your pond or stream. On the other hand, I think some towns are concerned that these requirements are so strict that a town will violate the permit requirements even if they're doing a good job to take care of it within the means that they have available to them.
Can I ask a question? In that example you just had, the problem could be on personal property, right? It's not even the town's to fix necessarily?
Actually, it is the town's to fix. The question was whether since it's on private properties, that the town's to fix. The town is responsible legally for discharges from its stormwater system. So whatever those discharges get into that system isn't important to EPA. The town's responsible for the quality of that discharge. I think where you're going to find some pointing of fingers is when you have state-controlled roads that are within a town, and pollution is coming off a state road into a town stormwater system. In that case, it's really important for the town to have good data, sampling data, that can point to what's coming off the road, so they make a case to EPA that it shouldn't be held responsible for pollutants that are coming from this other state agency, which will have its own MS4 permit.
You have a situation where, I mean, the one question might be who pays, but the other question is just it's on personal property, and the person says, I don't want you touching my land. I mean, that,
Yeah.
Take us 60 days just to get on the property.
yeah.
Yeah, the question was about what about coming onto somebody's private property? You're required to have an illicit discharge detection and elimination ordinance that grants the town authority to come onto private property. So, might want to check to see if you have that power in your illicit discharge detection elimination current ordinance.
I think we'll invite you to town meeting.
Yeah.
This comes with funding, of course, right? This comes with funding too from the EPA,
Does
right?
not come with funding. Do you have a representative or open town meeting?
Open.
Open? Okay.
Open season.
Yeah.
Wide open.
Well, in that theme, if you want someone to come talk to town meeting about that, I'm happy to do so. I can't represent EPA's position on things, but I can help explain things to people. So I'm happy to do that.
Thank you for that. We'll stand behind you.
You should probably stand to either side of me.
So you practice self-immolation, too.
We'll be in the catchment area.
Yeah.
But did you say that for the state roads, there's a permit that the state would have with EPA, or am I just hoping?
Yes, municipal, MS4 this permit, municipal separate storm sewer system. EPA's definition of municipality includes towns and public agencies like DCR, like DOT. The DOT will have its own individual permit. I think it's important for the towns, when you're working with MMA or working with stormwater coalitions, to be able to try to get EPA to act quickly to issue the draft and final permit for DOT, so that they have a permit at the same time you do under the new permit rules.
Fred,
Yes.
what's the consequence to a town of failing to meet a permit?
Anna, I know you, but could you introduce yourself?
Oh, sorry. Anna Mayer, 29 Juniper Road.
Yes, the question is what sort of, for lack of a better word, punishment is available from EPA. EPA has issued fines to a handful of towns in Massachusetts, ranging as much as $20,000, I think was the highest one, for failure to meet the reporting requirements of the permit.
So the reporting, but if you fail the water quality standard, whatever, your permit, does that have a separate consequence?
There could be that sort of consequence. EPA doesn't have a lot of staff to be able to handle the oversight of other states that issue these sorts of permits, and the EPA issued permits in New Hampshire and DEP. But they are going to be requiring electronic reporting for the permit, which means a town will be inputting their data, saying how they're doing, which will make it somewhat easier for EPA staff to be able to track the substance of what towns are doing. I think from EPA's point of view, that the way I characterize it is that EPA's moved from general requirements to explicit, detailed requirements on 5 of the 6 minimum control measures. I personally wish they had gone part way, but I think part of the reason EPA was thinking about this is that they looked at the towns, saying Littleton's a good example. You're doing better stormwater management with the permit. It's clear from your report. There are some towns that aren't doing much of anything. And during the first round of these permits, some towns were saying, don't tell us what to do, we'll take care of it. Towns like Littleton responded to that. Some other towns in the state didn't. You could go through some permits, and they're clearly not meeting most of the requirements of the permit. So that's not a reason, but that's an explanation of why EPA's jumped from general to very specific with this permit.
Question?
You have another question.
Brad Mitchell, Board of Health. Are there fees the town has to pay along with the permit as well?
No, this is free of charge.
Free of charge.
Except for all the work you need to
Just
do.
the gift, right?
That goes to the lens of the question, what is the funding source again?
Yes, the funding source is,
Yes.
is the Finance Committee here?
Yes, we're here.
Yes, well,
Good luck.
yeah, I've got some things to say about costs a little later that may allay some of your fears. Let me continue with the specific requirements. Some of the specific requirements are illicit discharge detection and elimination. Dry weather monitoring and all outfalls. It only requires wet weather if, in the number 3 bullet, based on systems vulnerability factors, there are 12 factors that can be a trigger. So somebody on your staff is going to be having to look at these 12 systems vulnerability factors and seeing how each catchment area fits into those. Mass DEP has been helping towns in central Massachusetts with...
Pointing to who on the staff,
Well,
my fear is that we don't have yet the staff person that would be doing that because we're not staff for it. So.
Once the state sends the funding, we'll get the staff.
But it's B.
Well,
The state would say it's a federal mandate, not a state mandate.
Take the money from the feds too.
Yep.
The Mass DEP has been helping the Central Massachusetts Stormwater Coalition, started about 4 years ago. It was like the original 13 colonies. Originally it was 13 towns, it's 28 towns now that are working together to do stormwater work.
We're part of the Northern Middlesex Stormwater Collaborative through NIMCOG.
Yep.
And Corey from the Water Department has been participating in that work for a couple of years now, I think.
Good. Yeah, it's a good way of figuring out how you can save some money, not huge money, but some money on cooperatively working on mapping. For example, the Central Massachusetts group bought 2 really sophisticated GIS machines. I think at the time, one of them cost $20,000, the other one's $18,000 a piece, and shared them among the towns. GPS reads in 2 dimensions. This one reads in 3 dimensions. So you can use it in order to map the hydrology around your catchment area. That's a good thing to be able to do because EPA is going to be requiring that sort of analysis. But one of the things that Mass DEP did too was work with Worcester Polytechnic Institute to have some of their students do some projects for us. And one of the projects was a fairly complex database tool towns can use to be able to figure out how their catchment areas, these are areas around all your outfalls, each of your outfalls, fits into these systems vulnerability factors. So you may be able, through your work in your Stormwater Coalition, access some of that work from Central Massachusetts too, which can help trim some of the costs, make it a little bit easier to do. Part of the reason I put all this detail in about illicit discharge detection and elimination is multiply this by 20 and you'll get a sense for all the permit requirements. There are, again, 252 of them that I counted in the 6 minimum control measures. And that doesn't count yet the work you're going to have to do for your impaired rivers and streams. So a requirement is to meet the 6 minimum control measures and begin dealing with the impaired waters. As I've said, that the draft goes from general to the specific. These 4 bullets under there, the main points in DEP's comment letter to EPA, telling them there are going to be significant increases to towns, that EPA should bear that in mind and try to reduce or eliminate some of its requirements as a way to trim costs for towns. That there are many administrative and reporting requirements, that they're moving away from a BMP-based program. Again, it lists things that a town can do, but exposes town to some liability if it doesn't exist under the current permit, if federal or state water quality standards are not met. I put the last thing about mass stormwater standards there. It's for the people that are in the Conservation Commission using that. The EPA proposed to use a different set of rules for how you manage stormwater than the rules we've been using in Massachusetts since 1997. I think they're going to go along with using the Massachusetts rules. I put this slide in. It has indications of where you have impaired waters in your town. You do have impaired waters. Good news is the one official document you have is called a TMDL that requires actions to be able to be done at that particular pond, for Forge Pond, is a New England Regional Mercury TMDL. In other words, for none of your rivers and streams, I could find a final document that says, here are the steps you should take. But that's coming because most of your rivers and streams, whether it's Mill Pond, whether it's Beaver Brook, Spectacle Pond, Long Pond, are impaired enough to require what's called a TMDL. TMDL stands for Total Maximum Daily Load. That's basically rivers and streams have a water quality standard they're supposed to meet. It's down at this area here. When we monitor and sample the streams, we find out the amount of pollution they have is really up here. So a TMDL requires a town, and could require other entities too, to reduce the amount of pollutants so it meets federal water quality standards. There can be a lot of reductions. In the Charles River Basin, the amount of phosphorus that needs to be reduced is 2/3. So all the towns, the 33 towns, I think, in the Charles River Basin, are going to be responsible for finding ways to reduce phosphorus. The easiest way to do that with stormwater is to take stormwater that would otherwise run off a site, direct it onto the site, put it in infiltration basins or rain gardens, which are smaller infiltration basins, have it seep back into the ground. That takes care of the phosphorus to a great extent. Yes, ma'am.
I know I have a question here, but I'll let you get through your presentation. We'll do questions at the end.
That's fine. Again, this is because you have some impaired waters that exceed federal state water quality standards, you're going to have to do some work on it. Some towns have not been doing any work. The slide says, no, Thursday's out. How about never? Is never good for you?
You said I'm my boss. It was over.
And how's that working for you? What EPA is going to be redoing is requiring each town that has impaired waters that's subject to the permit to take specific actions. Sometimes it's actions in 20 years, planning actions up front, and then specific BMP actions, things built in the ground later on. Lake and pond requirements, basically requiring some planning work to be done. They're called non-structural BMPs, things like a pet waste ordinance or pet waste information to people. And then what EPA it's called structural BMPs. Those are things you build in the ground to be able to manage stormwater. The reason I have this in here is because there are a lot of other towns that face more serious problems than Littleton does, but Littleton will also be subject to these impaired waters requirements. The timing of the permit. The draft went out the first draft went out in 2010, and then it got pulled back. And then the next draft went out in 2014, and it's kind of like the play Waiting for Godot. EPA was saying, the permit will be here any day now. People have been waiting for it, and it hasn't appeared yet. EPA tells us they intend to issue this permit by the end of this year. The effective date of the permit, we believe, will be July of next year. The reason the effective date will be different is because EPA heard towns say, don't make the effective date in the middle of the fiscal year because we can't get the money we need from town meeting to be able to do the work. So I think EPA's idea here is to issue the permit, have it be effective starting July 1st. Since the permit would be issued by the end of the year, that would give you some time to start grappling with the permit's requirements. Part of the good news, someone asked earlier if EPA was giving any money. They are not giving money, they are giving some time. All the permit requirements don't pop in all at once. For example, the stormwater management plan, the blueprint that the town's supposed to have to be able to show how it's meeting the requirements of the permit, is due 1 year after the effective date of the permit. So you do have some time to prepare yourself to be able to examine the ordinances you have and see what changes need to occur in the ordinances. I believe the ordinances need to be changed in the first 2 years of the effective date, after the effective date of the permit. So you do have some time. The permits for 5 years, it's probably the same 5 years as the last permit that was issued in 2003 for 5 years, and has been administratively continued for a good amount of time after that. The cost to implement the proposed MS4 permit it's really all over the map. It depends on how much work a town has already been done. So I wanted to give you the benefit of some estimates and tell you where those estimates came from. You'll end up doing your own work to figure out what it will cost to be able to meet the requirements of the permit. Again, there's a spreadsheet that was developed by the last set of Worcester Polytechnic Institute students that the town can use to be able to estimate its costs. Costs occur in lots of different places in town. Some towns less sophisticated than Littleton believe that all the cost is in the DPW. It's not. You already know it's in the Lakes and Ponds Committee. It's already Water Department. Conservation Commission's probably involved in it, certainly Roads and Highways. But the original estimate from EPA was a huge range, up to $500,000 annually. Our observation about that, it was excluded contingency costs like an illicit discharge detection and elimination case that requires tens of thousands of dollars of all by itself, or the cost for what's listed here as TMDL implementation. You can think of that as impaired waters work. What do you have to do to work on what work do you need to do for the towns, for the streams and ponds in the town that are polluted more than federal and state standards? When EPA looked at the annual costs of a previous draft from 2010, they looked at 3 towns in the Upper Charles. One town was incremental expenses, the other one was twice as much, the other one was 3 to 4 times as much. You could guess which town is doing more work right now to be able to deal with stormwater, and which town isn't. Bellingham is one of the towns that is on the end of the spectrum of could do more work on their 2003 permit. The WPI students used their spreadsheet tool to work with some towns who are doing better stormwater management than others. They found an increase of somewhere between 25 and 75%. My guess is when you use Littleton's tool, you're going to come more in that range than in Bellingham's range of 3 to 4 times more. It's still a significant amount of money. DEP's comments on the draft, EPA have already gone over these and told you what we told EPA about. What I've done in this presentation is let you know stormwater is a problem, what kind of harm it causes. I've given you some idea of what the proposed MS4 permit will require. I didn't go over the 252 requirements. That's probably a subject of a working session with your town employees at some point. I wanted to cover what DEP does to help towns. We offer direct assistance to towns. I'll go anywhere, anytime to talk about stormwater. I'm here in Littleton Monday night. During this past summer, I was in Greenfield for a 4 to 6 p.m. meeting on Friday during the summertime. There were 3 people that showed up. Unfortunately, I don't fish. It would have been a good trip, but I don't do fly casting. But I'll go anywhere, anytime to talk about stormwater, whoever's here anyway.
We certainly thank you for coming and giving such a great overview. It's as clear as it can be, I suppose. I mean, I guess...
Clear as Mill Pond.
Yeah, clear as Mill Pond. Coming from my side, and then I'll open up to the board and then in public. I guess
Mill Pond.
first one is, I'm just surprised, because we have such great water here. I know Mill Pond is not the best example, but our drinking water is amazing. So I was just, and with Long Pond, or Long Lake, we have done work there with, the stormwater retrofit project and the rain gardens and stuff like that. So we have, as you mentioned, taken steps to be proactive about this, and the LW, the water department does a great job with best management practices, so I was just a little surprised that we were in violation.
No, I have to interrupt you there. I don't think you're in violation of the 2003 permit.
Okay. So we are having to take steps.
EPA has never said we are.
Okay.
We're just making sure that we're not.
The presentation tonight is letting you know you're doing a great job with the existing permit. There's a new permit coming that raises the bar significantly, and it's going to be a struggle for the town to meet all the requirements of the new permit.
Yeah, okay, no, that helps. I guess I'm just getting a little defensive because I think we rock. So, all right, board, Selectman Avella.
No, you're the messenger, Fred, and there's no intention to shoot you, so thank you. I appreciate it greatly. I certainly hope, though, because it is an onerous burden being placed upon EPA, You did mention they're not all that well-staffed, so I hope the federal budget is going to help them out, because I certainly won't want them to suffer for all this extra work that they have to do. Everybody
Very
here knows me-
gracious.
Everybody here knows me well enough, where I'm headed with that one. The question about the penalty was asked.
He's
to
a
the
big
examiner.
government guy, so.
Yeah, real big. Really, a serious question.
Yes, sir.
Are our state legislators, or even our federal legislators, are they taking any steps to perhaps reel EPA in a little bit?
The MMA wrote a letter to EPA Administrator, Gina McCarthy, asking for a meeting of some representatives of MMA and part of the congressional delegation. This is a federal mandate. That was the appropriate area, I think, for the MMA to respond. The state legislators know about this permit. I think they feel somewhat limited because it's being imposed upon the state. Our DEP Commissioner, Marty Suberg, wants to make sure there's assistance available to the towns. We aren't in charge of that permit. We can't change the permit requirements, but we can help towns deal with those requirements.
What was the administrator's response to MMA's request?
I'm not sure the status of that right now. It'd probably be best to work through your town administrator to see what MMA has been doing.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Another thing is, as this moves forward, and we've all lived long enough to suffer through federal mandates and the costs associated with it, looking at you, Betsy, and the FinCom, is figuring out how we go about paying for this. If, even if it's another penny, it's still another penny that wasn't contemplated, 30 days ago. So, it's either raise taxes or it's cut something out that we're currently doing. So those are things we'll have to look at very closely.
There's actually a third option that most communities that are doing it is pursuing, and that is to establish a stormwater utility and a fee structure.
Yeah, who might pay for that, Keith?
Pardon?
Who might pay for that?
The same people that are paying taxes.
Okay, I
and water
thought, yeah.
bills and everything else.
So let's not quibble. It's going to cost the people of the town more money.
It will. It costs people more money no matter how it's funded. Some towns are starting to look at stormwater utilities. People pay their water costs by how much water they use. Maybe the people ought to be paying the stormwater fee based on how much stormwater work they cause to the town. Large impervious areas pay more, small impervious areas pay less. My town of Dedham, 8% of the property in town is tax exempt. They aren't paying anything toward that stormwater work right now, because right now, stormwater is funded through taxes in almost all towns in Massachusetts. So there's an equity issue there. It can be, as you said, Mr. Selectman, about it being a tax. It comes out of somebody's pocket. The question is, what's the most equitable way to do that?
Thanks. Selectman Jacobs.
Well, I was getting to the financial part of it as well. Paul probably did a better job than I would have. Definitely appreciate your time and making yourself available for us in the future. Giving us a lot to digest. Curious where you're going to swim, where on the Charles.
That 1 mile swim that's canceled every once in a while is off of the boat dock right near the Hatch Shell. It's a...
So you're not doing it in Riverdale?
Riverdale? I would. I accidentally swim, I accidentally swim in the Charles when I go kayaking.
I've done that as well.
Yeah, there's a kayak launch up at the, far above Riverdale, at the Dolan Center, near one of the senior life facilities in Dedham. It's a good place to go kayaking.
Good luck.
I have a question. With the EPA, like right now, we had a report done mostly by the water department. So you said some towns haven't even done that so far. My question is, how does the EPA check on whether a town is doing something or not? Like we handed in a report, say a neighboring town doesn't. Is there someone from the EPA that's coming out to check on this? Or is it just through paperwork that goes back to your organization?
It's paperwork. A submittal goes to EPA, and a copy goes to DEP. EPA scans these and puts them on their website. So what I did was go on EPA's website and look for your Year 12 annual report, and there it was. When a few towns were fined some years ago, that got towns into compliance making sure they're submitting their annual reports on time.
Thank you.
Mr. Knox?
Good question. Okay, public input.
Just one question I had.
And could you introduce yourself, please?
You mentioned that some...
Fred, could you introduce yourself?
Oh, Fred Faulkner, 141 Harwood Ave, and member of the Finance Committee. You mentioned earlier that state highways, the state has a permit, and they're responsible for managing that. We have 111, 119, 2A, 2, 495 is state or federal, I'm not sure.
It's managed by DOT.
So that has to be a huge contributor. Those 5 roads must be a huge contributor to the issue that, other than Long Pond, and maybe some little bit comes off 2A at the Long Pond, but certainly Beaver Brook, Fort Pond, Speck Pond, even Mill Pond coming off Route 2 has got to be an inflow, an outflow from the roads, an inflow to those bodies of water. So how does our responsibility versus the state's responsibility get handled or split or whatever?
In general, split responsibilities is that each entity that's regulated is supposed to take care of its own stormwater. DOT has a current permit, just like you have a current permit, and they're meeting their permit requirements. When this new permit comes on board for the towns, that's ahead right now of DOT's. You'd want to use whatever resources you have in your coalition, stormwater coalition, to try to get EPA to issue its DOT permit so that it becomes effective around the same time. There are elements in parts of the permit that talk about when you have contributing stormwater coming from one system into another, and it's in your town's interest to make sure that you're tracking those as much as you can. And this is, again, I'm making a pitch for working together. Other towns are in the same boat, coming up with a standard protocol that other towns that are in your stormwater coalition can use to be able to make sure that EPA knows that the DOT's pollution is the responsibility of DOT and not the responsibility of Littleton. It's a good idea.
Anna Mayer, 29 Juniper Road, also Conservation Commission. I was wondering, you said that an added responsibility is to identify whether the discharge meets requirements, meets the water quality standards. Now, do you mean that the discharge before it enters the water body that it's going into? So we'd actually have to sample the discharge and have the discharge meet water quality standards, not necessarily the entering water body.
Yes.
Water body it's entering.
Yes, that's the purpose of the wet weather monitoring requirement, is that someone takes samples from a stormwater system while it's raining and tests those samples to see if they meet water quality standards or not.
So no dilution whatsoever, it's just effluent has to meet the water quality standards.
Yeah, and if you think about that, there's an awful lot of water coming into a stream, and a small portion of it coming in from a stormwater system, relatively small portion. That portion usually gets mixed in the stream. What EPA is going to be requiring, it looks like, is for you to test it before it gets diluted into the stream. My reading of the permit doesn't say that the town has to decide whether you meet federal or state water quality standards, but you will be required to report the results of your wet weather monitoring, which will give anyone the ability to look at that and say, looks like it's meeting the clean water standards, or it's not meeting water standards. And that is adds some risk to the town. Third-party lawsuits are possible. I'm not saying they're probable, but they are possible to enforce the Clean Water Act. Some from EPA's, where they're sitting, they've been sued by Conservation Law Foundation and Charles River Watershed Association because they're not doing enough to be able to meet the requirements of the federal Clean Water Act. So EPA, to some extent, can be seen as being caught in the middle. So they're trying to make sure their requirements are increased. That's going to cause some risk to the town. And again, I think MMA is probably working on that.
Brad Mitchell, 1 Old Miss Road, and the Board of Health. I do want to point out I'm aware of at least one entity in this town that's been subject to a private lawsuit for not meeting the requirements of the Clean Water Act. Conservation Law Foundation filed suit, a business in town. So this is going to open this up even more.
Amy Green, the Concom agent. I'm just curious, do you have any sense in your crystal ball about how the draft regs as they are now will get to final? Do you think they're fundamentally in place, or will there still be changes potentially?
There are going to be some changes. I don't think the changes will be fundamental to the permit. I think they will reduce the number of administrative and reporting requirements. Whether that's change around the edges or whether it's significant enough to decrease costs to towns remains to be seen. I haven't seen what they're going to be putting out as a final permit. They do seem committed to issuing the permit by the end of the year.
Any other questions? Comments from the board, questions? Keith, how about next steps?
Well, I was just going to suggest that before we get to that, we do have town council here tonight, and if Tom has any pearls of wisdom he just wants to share with us on what we're facing here, and just and how some of the other communities he serves are dealing with similar issues. So
Freshwater pearls of wisdom.
Absolutely. So, to tell you the truth, I don't have a lot of pearls of wisdom. I think we are where we are. We're looking at adding an IDDE bylaw or a set of regulations at our fall town meeting. I think it's important to get them in place either through bylaw or through regulation. We won't really know what we're facing with the new permit until the new permit is issued. End of the year, I'm getting the same information you are, that it does seem to be on track for the end of the year. Once it comes in, I think we're going to really need to make some hard choices and to look at how we're going to fund this, because this is going to be a bear. And I will tell you that some of our other communities are looking at a stormwater utility to fund it. It does arguably spread the costs more equitably. Someone has a lot of impervious surface, they're going to pay more. If someone has just a little bit of impervious surface, they're going to pay less. So I think I'm not making that recommendation, but I am suggesting that you consider that way of funding it. And I think the town needs to think about what department is going to handle this. Is this a highways department? Is it a water department? The selectmen want to do it? I mean, I'm sure they're all lining up.
Jim Carr's not here.
The committee of one.
So I think this is not something that's going to go away. I think it's something that's going to kind of hit us square in the face very soon, and I think it's going to need to be a topic of discussion as we go into the annual.
Awesome.
But we thought it would be well to start. As I said, it's a steep learning curve. It's an issue that we don't get to duck, and so we're going to have to deal with it. And so we're starting tonight to educate ourselves and educate our public on a new topic on the horizon. So
We'll characterize it just a slight bit different. We don't get a case to duck it, Keith, so I'm going to pick on you because I'm going to ask that the board ask you to get with the MMA and find out the request of the administrators, the request of the administrator, and find out how it's being handled. Because if from we're getting, if not every town in the Commonwealth that's already been exposed to this, each municipality, showing the vast majority of the municipalities now are finding difficulties with this. As we look at ever-increasing tax burdens or utility burdens, whatever we want to call it, as we go forward and how we want to do that, I'd rather not we just lay down, acquiesce, and say, we'll roll on it, as we continue at the very least to question the efficacy of such a program. And I understand it's federal. I haven't been a federal employee for a couple of years, understanding how that steamroller gets going, and good luck stopping it. Nevertheless, we shouldn't just roll over, is what I would offer.
Well said. I couldn't agree more. And I think, Keith, you said you'd take
We'll be
that action.
we'll be happy to work with our similarly situated.
Queen Victoria now, we'll be happy.
We're the royal we, all 10,000 of us.
Any other comments? One last, Michael?
Mike Selden. Just when, this is general, we know how much this can cost. Has anyone at the EPA indicated the financial benefit, if they can measure it in dollars, for carrying out this program as envisioned?
I haven't seen any cost-benefit analyses, partly because the Federal Clean Water Act explicitly says that you're not supposed to take into consideration costs when it comes to issuing standards and enforcing standards for clean water, similarly to clean air. What I've seen in my lifetime since the first Earth Day to now, at the time, the first Earth Day, about a third of our rivers and streams in the country were swimmable and fishable. Now about two-thirds of those rivers and streams are swimmable and fishable. And that's really the goal, is trying to get to the point where we can use our rivers and streams for fishing, for recreating, however we want to use them. That said, I haven't seen any cost-benefit analyses. Those would have to take into account the benefit of fishing, for example. What's the monetary benefit of being able to fish locally? What's the monetary benefit of being able to swim in a pond or to use a kayak in a stream? Those are, if one's calculating costs and benefits, monetizing those benefits would be something that one would need to do.
So I'm sorry, so you're saying there's no track, for example, to incidence of disease? In other words, it's mercury poisoning, that kind of stuff. I'm just throwing stuff out, but I'm trying to, so you're saying none of that is it's fishing and recreation?
No, the federal and state water quality standards have multiple requirements to them. We use swimmable and fishable just as a handy way of talking about what the goal is. There are standards set for maximum amount of pollutants that can be in a river and stream. For example, or for temperature, for example. If you've got cold water fisheries and the water is warmed up by developments and then goes into the river, into that particular stream, and warms that stream up so that it can't support those cold water fish anymore, that's a pollutant. That's recognized in the Clean Water Act.
So I think it might be good to beef up on that portion of the presentation, all the good stuff we would get out of putting these. I know you had at least one slide, but maybe you just off the top of your head had more than even your presentation had. So especially if you do come to town meeting to help us, let's work on the advantages that it brings, whether monetary or not.
Non-regulatory advantages.
Yes.
Got it.
Exactly. Anything to help us. Okay, very good. Good, guys. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
We will invite you back.
Oh, boy.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
Your happy ending slides.
Yes. Yeah, thanks again for the invitation.
Thanks, Fred.
We won't spend the money. It's fun, too.
Interesting. Good debate there. All right, we are really on time here-ish, overall. We are going to work on special town meeting, the order of articles first, and then recommendations. That's 6A1. 6A.
Right. There are a total of 11 articles that have been inserted on the warrant for the special town meeting, and the... And we are
We're looking for the Board of Selectmen to finalize the order in which the articles appear so that we can then post the warrants.
Madam Chair? Is the board going to address the other item under 6B this evening?
We did that already.
Oh,
sorry.
We
No.
didn't say,
Apologies.
we didn't address that.
We haven't got there yet, but I don't think,
Table it?
yeah, I think we're probably.
The chair had asked that we not, since he's not here, and he would like it handled with a full board, so that would come to a future meeting.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's fine.
on the- That's on the agenda item on the staffing vacancy review for highway town engineer.
Thank you.
Okay. But you can still stay for the town meeting.
Yeah.
We weren't posted, so
Okay.
I'm sure we'll have time.
You'll hear all about it tomorrow night. Same bat channel. same-
Excellent reason. Well done, Fred.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
So the order in which the articles are presented follows the recommendation, recent practice, the recommendation from the study committee to increase voter participation, which had recommended that we put financial articles first, followed by those requiring supermajority vote, followed by all others. The order in which they appear in the warrant as presented to you is that order. And within that, what we've tried to do was put them in a certain order. For example, that we're proposing that that we establish a PEG access and cable-related fund in Article 2, and then when we get to the recommendations in Article 4, we will be citing that as a source of funding for money for the LCTV budget, for example. So the first step would be to finalize the order in which the articles appear. The only new article that came up at last week's meeting that wasn't in the draft warrant that had been presented was an article regarding the Nagog Hill Orchard leases. By the policy, that's a two-thirds vote of town meeting. It would go in with supermajority votes in the middle, and that's where we've put it. Town council also drafted the article. I think once we get into the recommendations, we'll need to have a more substantive discussion. I would suggest not tonight, but that at a future meeting about any terms and conditions about that lease. There'd actually been an issue about what the land area should be that's involved in the lease. The article as drafted would provide for maximum flexibility on the part of town meeting by taking the description of the Nagog Hill property as it was contained in the original vote back in 2000, when the only other time we put the lease out for a competitive bid. If there is discussion that maybe this piece ought to not be included because it abuts the pond, and I mentioned that specifically because you had received a proposal from Rick Finley asking that you not include that part. I would suggest that there be a discussion about that prior to, on town meeting floor. We ought to discuss it and see what the issues are before we get to town meeting together. But, and that we may want to, you have a working group established on agricultural properties with representatives from this board, Conservation Commission, and the AgCom. I think it would probably be wise to assemble that group and to talk about this article and bring you back a recommendation. But in terms of how the article gets posted, absent any discussion about it, I think the safest thing to do would be just simply to use the description of the premises that we did last time we put out Nagog Hill Orchard for a lease. And if it ends up being something else, then the motion that would be offered under the article would so state. But
Okay, I guess I didn't know that this was coming up, and I read through it, and there were too many articles to go take a look at which parcel's this, which parcel's that.
Yeah.
So I was confused. So you're saying at a later date that we can go through this and take out parts we don't want?
You can
or-
take out the parts that you don't want, but if we take out all that we've done is taken the description of the premises as, of the licensed premises for the current lease. That's what we've got. That reaches back to a May 2000 article that had originally authorized a 10-year lease. I asked town council to translate what that description of parcels was to plans that we don't have. Could he also describe them in terms of assessor's map and parcel number for easy reference? So the article describes the premises in both fashions. It says, here's the map and parcel numbers, here's the deed plan descriptions. But it's the same land area as in the current lease that we have with Nagog Fruiters. Same land.
So when you have broken it down on this page here, Tom, that lists, the parcel number and so forth. So that's so we can reference in the, see, I have to go back and read this again because it was too much when I thought we were just doing the ordering of the articles and didn't pay that much attention until the last minute.
Yeah.
My fault.
Yeah.
But I just want to make sure that we have a chance to discuss this before. I
Yeah,
guess
I mean-
my fear inside was that this was automatically going to town meeting and me not knowing that maybe something's being left out or added to the...
Yeah, we didn't leave out or add anything. I mean, we felt that absent any direction from the board whatsoever, other than to put in an article in for Nagog Hill Orchard, all we could do is take our existing understanding of what that is and put it in the article. And if you want to have it be something different, you still have the ability to do that in the motion that's offered on town meeting floor, but we've got to discuss that.
Okay.
And we haven't discussed it yet. I just wanted to make that clear before we posted a warrant with that article. So if the order of articles is okay, you can take the motion under 6A2, or 6A1, rather.
6A1. Lost my 6A1. Any issues?
No, I have none.
I'm good with it.
Good.
Ready? Move that the Board of Selectmen vote to approve the order in which the articles appear on the warrant for November 2, 2015, special town meeting, and direct the constable post said warrant forthwith.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so moved. Awesome. Very good. Now recommendation.
And then the next one is prepared a first draft of the town meeting report document, which is the voter information that we would mail out 2 weeks before town meeting. And it contains the article, a proposed motion, recommendations, and explanations of each article. We will be finalizing the motions and recommendations and explanations as we go. But I do think that there's probably a handful of articles, at least, that we've talked about enough, where if you wanted to take votes tonight to recommend them, you could, with the idea that there are certain other articles that we need to discuss further, that we should move the conversation to October 5th, the next meeting. A goal is to have as many of the recommendations as possible adopted on October 5th, because we go to the printer with the document that gets mailed out to the voters. So while legally you don't need to have the recommendations by that night, if you don't, then they won't be included in the voter information packet that gets mailed out. So we strive to have as much information in that package as we can. So there's no, just running through the articles, Article 1, bills of prior years, we don't have any yet. I think we can just not take any action yet.
Yeah.
Give Bonnie another month to
We can do that.
find
No
an
problem.
unpaid bill. We've had a discussion about the establishment of the LCTV PEG access and cable-related fund, which would be necessary to continue our practice of keeping those cable subscription funds available only
It's an
for
organizational
cable.
thing, right?
It requires a vote of town meeting. It reflects our current practice.
we cannot continue the current practice unless we adopt this vote, so.
So I think we'll discuss that.
As worded, is LCTV happy with it? The cable
They are
committee?
ecstatic.
So the wording that's here, cable committee's happy with it?
Yes, they are.
Let's go with that one then.
Yeah, I think we've already discussed that.
Okay.
Okay. We should hold, I'm sorry, if you wish, you could vote Article 3, also the amending the revolving funds. We've talked about the dog enforcement bylaw, which we need to help fund the intermunicipal agreement with Boxborough. We talked about establishing the LCTV revolving fund to receive the funds that we get from Boxborough, and the community gardens revolving fund for Conservation Commission. We discussed last week, and you approved their fee structure. So I think those three are in an approvable form under Article 3. Article 4, I would suggest you wait until a discussion about the budgets, including the highway engineering, and so that can wait till October 5th. Fund collective bargaining agreements in Article 5, you voted to ratify the police contract last time. I think you can safely vote to recommend the article tonight.
Agreed.
Personnel bylaw amendments, you got a full briefing from the Personnel Board that we're, I would say, simply updating the remaining salary schedules that we didn't increase at the annual town meeting. We should have, we didn't, and now we're going to correct that oversight. So we should be able to vote on that. Supplemental capital funds from available funds. I would defer to Bonnie on the status of those three. I think we've talked about them, but you've got some information about the fuel facility.
Correct. We did meet with or had a conference call with the apparent low bidder for the fuel facility, and is willing to hold his contract price until after town meeting, so that we'll be able to kind of keep going along with that project. So that was some good news to you.
And the other project is the Council on Aging kitchen.
Yeah, this would just allow them to do a little bit more of the expanded scope that they were looking to originally address with the stove.
And the third is to use PEG funds to launch the educational channel.
Is that also, I was catching up for last week's, will that enable the streaming ability, or is that totally separate? I heard something about streaming ability.
The new server gives
yeah.
us that functionality, as I recall.
Cool. Yeah. Okay.
So 7's good.
Sounds good.
8, we need more discussion.
Yeah, 8 we will need further discussion on, that's Nagog Hill. Articles 9 and 10, both of the requests of the Council on Aging to establish a aid to elderly and disabled taxation fund and to reduce their membership from 11 to 9. If you're in agreement with their requests, I think you could vote to recommend both tonight.
11, hold.
11, we need to have further discussion on. That's the town bylaw amendment on discharges to municipal storm drain system. And maybe Tom could just brief us on where we think we are on this, that we think we either need a town board to adopt a set of regulations.
Yeah. So we do not have, to the best of my knowledge, an illicit discharge detection bylaw currently. I think it can be done either in the form of a bylaw or in the form of a regulation. So it's up to you which way you want to go with that. I'm comfortable that we satisfy the conditions of the 2003 permit with either, but we do need to get one of them in place. One of the conditions of the new permit will be, are you in compliance with your 2003 permit? And this is the last piece. As Fred pointed out, Littleton's done a nice job on there was the 6 things that we needed to do. We've done a nice job on most of them. We're missing this one, and I think it's best to get it in place before the new permit comes out.
What's the pros and cons to doing regulation versus bylaw? Apologies for a basic question.
No, I mean, you know, I'll give you one.
Yeah.
That if a regulation it requires an action by an authorized town board, and I think is, especially if that board might be the Board of Selectmen, although I'm not recommending that, we'd then have to find someone who is. The Board of Health is authorized, water commissioners are authorized, planning board is not authorized, or...
To my knowledge, we can look into it further.
Yeah. Planning board seemed like it might be a candidate that we might want to pursue. I guess from the standpoint, there must be some reason in our corporate memory why in 2003, when we had the permit, nobody brought it forward as a town bylaw. And I'm guessing that someone made the judgment back then that the town wouldn't pass it.
Jim?
And so...
I know Eric Darling, the former director, was working on some stuff with Savas, and we can't seem to find that document anywhere, but they had some recommendations at the time from other people that had done it, and it just, I think at the time they just felt it wasn't going to go through at town meeting the way it was written, because a lot of it is, you know, we have a lot of high groundwater, people discharge, and they just felt it wasn't going to pass, so they wanted to work on it a little more than just never made it back.
Yeah, I mean, that's the risk. Never ask town meeting for the answer yes unless you're prepared for the answer no. And in this case, I think the answer no would mean that DEP would find us in violation. It's one thing to have not acted. I think it's another thing to have to disapprove an action. So I think we want to still want to have a discussion with those boards that were here tonight, and I was delighted to see so many boards represented, but we still need to figure out what the right thing to do under this article is. But to preserve the option of adopting a bylaw, or maybe to vote to authorize some board that we're not comfortable is authorized without a town meeting vote.
Right, exactly.
Maybe we think, you know, for example, if it were to be the planning board, and the statute doesn't clearly say they can do it, a bylaw could authorize them to do it. So that's a further discussion that we need to have between now and town meeting.
Much more in-depth conversation because of what Keith and what Jim raised, and that the point is, for one of the town boards to go ahead and enact it as a regulation, and then the costs that are associated with it are going to be the residents of the town, whether it's a utility or a tax. The folks in Littleton will pay for it, or we put it in front of the people who vote on what they want to pay for their town, and that would be a town meeting. So that'll be a great philosophical discussion.
The other issue is that there is all the things that we were hearing tonight in the presentation have to do with that are going to cost money, I would say, come from an EPA permit that has yet to be issued and conditions that we're not currently required to have in a bylaw.
Right.
So, but there are some things that we said back in 2003 when we were issued an EPA permit that we would enforce. And so we're just reaching back to that time to say, all right, well then what we said back in 2003 that we would enforce in a bylaw, we'll enforce.
Yeah.
What the town did do clearly is that there was a much heralded set of best practices for low-impact development, which was issued in 2007. It has been routinely used by the planning board and other local boards as the standard that they impose by specific decision on developments that occur. They say you shall comply with the low-impact development standards. Typical requirement. I think it's even in one of the sections of the bylaw. I forget if it's the Littleton Common overlay zoning, or there's some single reference, I think, in the zoning bylaw to that standard in one of the zoning districts. So there was good work that was done by Littleton. We've taken credit for that good work in the reports that we have scrupulously
filed with EPA so that they wouldn't find us among those who didn't submit reports. But there's the question, as we move forward and EPA is paying closer attention, we just want to be very sure that whatever they come and look at next time, they're okay with. On the issue of regulations, Tom found the example that in the town of Concord, not to name names, that they don't have a bylaw, but they did have their Public Works Board adopt a set of regulations, which EPA didn't take issue with.
Right, Concord, they did take issue with Concord.
Yeah.
Concord adopted the regulations. And EPA never came out and said, that's okay, but they never said...
It wasn't okay.
Violation.
Yeah.
Must been hanging around with the NATO folks. Silence is consent. You ready for a motion?
I am.
Do we need the names or just the numbers, Keith? Of the articles?
For the viewing public, maybe you could just
I can
give
do
the
that.
titles too.
Move that the Board of Selectmen vote to support the following articles and direct the preparation of motions to be moved and seconded by said board of the following articles. Article 2, establish LCTV PEG access and cable-related fund. Article 3, amend FY 2016 revolving funds. Article 5, fund collective bargaining agreement. Article 6, personnel bylaw amendments. Article 7, supplemental FY 2016 capital items from available funds. Fuel facility replacement, supplemental. Council on Aging kitchen supplemental. LCTV capital equipment. Article 9, aid to elderly and disabled taxation fund. Article 10, town bylaw amendment, reduce council on aging membership from 11 to 9.
Second.
So we move in second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll see you again, too.
Yeah. I just wanted to introduce Keith to you and to the board. Ivrea Freed, who's an associate in our firm, who's going to be doing a lot of this MS4 work.
Oh, great. Nice to meet
Very
you.
good.
Nice
Thank
to meet you guys.
I've seen Ivrea's
Good way to
name
cut
on
your teeth.
the CC, and I know she's doing the work, and then Tom sends it to us, but hey!
Tom, before
Thank
you
you.
go anywhere, I'm sorry, we're just going to wrap up here with other business, and we have one item for you. So-
Yes, please. Your creative instincts, how they working?
Oh.
And for folks at home as to what I'm referring to, the Cooper Farm purchase possibilities, and we asked you at the last meeting if you could research some methods that we could employ.
Yes, the creative instincts are flowing, and they're in draft form. So let me...
For me personally, that's
Yeah.
sufficient, that the progress is happening. To go into it in detail tonight is not necessary for me.
Yeah, that's good.
Right, and we are taking steps to secure the appraisal, as we indicated we would. Tom's been in touch with, now heard from the attorney who represents the buyer.
Correct.
As well as we've been dealing with the attorney who only represents the seller now?
That's right.
Okay.
Well, not the attorney who represents the, we still just have Jonathan Avery
Yes,
on behalf of the seller.
okay. That's right, okay. Jonathan Avery, who is the appraiser who works for the seller, is the person that we're dealing with on behalf of the seller. So
Okay, but we will have a different appraiser.
we will have a
We will.
different appraiser,
Yes.
an independent appraiser.
That was my question to our legal team. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great,
Thanks.
thanks.
Yeah, that's,
At a couple meetings back, we talked about striping on 119 and 110, the intersection in Littleton Common. Can we get an update as to what the state of Massachusetts is doing for the residents of the town of Littleton and the other people who traverse that intersection daily?
Well, they haven't done anything yet, but the latest pledge is our commitment is to complete the restriping in an expedited fashion prior to the end of October.
Thank you. And may we ask the PMBC to update us on the senior diner kitchen and the progress and when we expect that to be ready for the senior diner to reopen?
I can give a slight update. There is a bid opening tomorrow for a major component of the work, so they should be moving.
At our next meeting, they'd be prepared to talk to us about that. Thank you. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
works.
So we ask them?
Works for me. Absolutely. Keep our eye on that one.
Thanks much, folks.
You bet. All right, meeting minutes. Discussion of rules. All right.
All set?
Yep.
Move that we approve the Board of Selectmen meeting minutes from September 14th, 2015.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
I got it.
Opposed? Look for another motion.
Second.
So moved and seconded, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen watching. Thanks for all those who came down here to participate. Thank you, Board, Keith,
Thank you.
Jen, Bonnie.